TikTok is under fire not just for national security issues, but also for mental health concerns. For a closer look at the app's impact on our minds, we speak with R.C. Williams, co-founder of the conservative grassroots organization Watchmen Action. R.C. Williams, thank you so much for joining us. TikTok critics say that the app negatively impacts mental health. Explain that for us.
Yeah, Chris, it's a blessing to be with you today. So part of what's happening with that statement is that the algorithms within the TikTok app are designed for what people may equate to something like doom scrolling. So you get on a social media app like TikTok, you scroll, you see something bad, and you're like, well, I guess I should keep going down the rabbit hole. And ultimately what's happening, Chris, is that the algorithm within TikTok is detecting you're engaging with this content. It goes even deeper when you talk about eye movement and how you engage with the screen. There are levels to this that go into greater detail, but at a very basic level, what's happening is that what you feed this thing and what you're telling it you're interested in, ultimately it will try to feed you more of, and that can get incredibly nefarious if we're not watching the watchers. So the real question has to be asked is, who is actually in charge of this thing, and then who's watching them?
Now, do you think that TikTok is contributing to the mental health crisis Gen Z is facing?
Yeah, Chris. So I think like with any tool, TikTok is a tool or an app or a platform, right? I think the bigger problem is who's in charge of that algorithm. So the way that it's structured now, it most certainly is having a negative impact because, as I mentioned a minute ago, that entire doom scrolling, that is a business. So if people are into this negative content, the Epoch Times ran a story about a young lady who committed suicide. Well, her and her friend had seen a suicide live on TikTok, deleted the app, but they were back a week later. And you start to ask yourself, is that like a dopamine problem where it's like, well, I saw that, but I still got to download it because I still got to see what's going to happen next. That certainly contributes to mental issues, especially with Gen Z, because in some ways they've been sheltered from how the world works. So when you combine that and there's this dopamine hit with social media, once the algorithm or an app like TikTok gets a hold of that, they'll continue to feed it to you because ultimately at the end of the day, your viewing time or your engagement leads to revenue for the app, and that's the bottom line for them.
RC, all of this is so, I don't know, depressing to think about. I mean, the parents watching this, what control do they have over it? You know, the kids are kind of on their phones all the time. What can parents do?
Chris, great question. So this actually starts well before a kid gets onto TikTok or any of the other apps, because we do have the challenge, Chris, on your device itself. When you get an iPhone or an Android, when you give those permissions, part of the permissions you give that a lot of people miss is that you give the ability for apps all across the board to access your data. So you'll wonder why you see something on TikTok and then you see it on Instagram. The reason why is because you gave permissions not only on your phone, but within those apps. So for parents, this actually starts before they ever engage an app. And I talked a moment ago about the moral decay. As parents and leaders in community, we have to be involved to help young people understand, listen, I know you're going to be on this app, and I know you're going to be engaged with it. Here are the things you need to look out for. And you distill it down so it's easy for them to understand. And then you have to deal with the tough question, Chris. The thing we don't deal with in American society, especially with young people these days, is, listen, here is what these people are trying to do to you. They're trying to manipulate your behavior for a financial result. It is okay to tell a young person that, because believe it or not, young people today are not only more technically adept, Chris, but they are actually smarter than we give them credit for. If we give them the playing field and they understand the rules, the decisions they make will improve. But that starts with us spiritually and morally as a people, Chris. We have to be involved. And I'll share this as well. Whatever ends up happening with TikTok, whether a U.S. company gets a hold of it or something else happens, the same rule applies that I mentioned a minute ago. We have to watch the watchers. Ultimately, in a self-governing society, that responsibility falls to us.
All right, R.C. Williams, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Chris.